This did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated.
In just over a week, the Taliban seized nearly all of Afghanistan, and now its forces control Kabul as some residents desperately try to flee the country. We will take a look at the situation in Afghanistan. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Just days ago, U.S. intelligence analysts warned that once American soldiers left Afghanistan, the Taliban could take Kabul within 30 to 90 days. But in reality, it was much faster than that. Over the weekend, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani left the country as Taliban fighters were on the outskirts of the capital. And it didn't take long for them to get into the presidential palace without firing any shots. To talk more about the situation there, we're joined now by CGTN's correspondent, Sean Callebs. And Sean, you've lived in Afghanistan, both as a diplomat and as a journalist. What do you make of the latest turn of events and what the Afghans face right now?
Well, I think U.S. President Joe Biden called it gut-wrenching, and I think that is probably the best term that I heard for the way this is all playing out. It is certainly heartbreaking as well. And also to hear President Biden say this unfolded quicker than we anticipated, you have to wonder who he was listening to, because virtually everyone I've talked to for such a long time believed that once the United States left and left that nation vulnerable, that it wouldn't last very long, that it would fall very quickly, and it did exactly. Biden is also blaming former President Trump for cutting the initial deal with the Taliban, not with the Taliban and the government of Afghanistan for the U.S. to pull out, but with the Taliban. And he spoke about 3 hours ago, talking about how it unfolded, and basically Biden is blaming everybody but himself.
When I spoke by phone to Ghani in July, we had very frank conversations. We talked about how Afghanistan should prepare to fight their civil wars after the U.S. military departed, to clean up the corruption in government, so the government could function for the Afghan people. We talked extensively about the need for Afghan leaders to unite politically. They failed to do any of that.
And he's also clearly talking about former President Ashraf Ghani. It's really kind of awkward to even say former president, since he just left the office yesterday and now is in one of the stands just to the north of Afghanistan. But it really also shows this horrific situation that has unfolded in the capital of Kabul. Just legions of people pouring into the Hamid Karzai airport trying to find a way out of the country. And a lot of these people were people who worked with the United States as interpreters or worked with them at the U.S. Embassy. And with the Taliban now in control, those are the people who will instantly have a target on their backs. We've also heard that the Taliban has gone door to door in some cases looking for either female journalists or women who have served or are serving in the Afghan parliament. So certainly a horrific situation could be unfolding there. And despite what Joe Biden said just earlier in the day, international community seems to be very outraged with the way the United States handled its withdrawal from Afghanistan.
I appeal to the Security Council and the international community as a whole to stand together, to work together and act together, and use all tools at its disposal to suppress the global terrorist threat in Afghanistan and to guarantee that basic human rights will be respected.
The chaos currently in Afghanistan is directly related to the hasty withdrawal of foreign troops. Relevant countries should earnestly deliver the commitment to support peace, reconciliation, and reconstruction in Afghanistan and play a constructive role on the issue of Afghanistan.
It's now a given that al-Qaeda can no longer carry out attacks against the United States from Afghanistan, as they did on September 11, 2001. But everything that has followed has not been as successful and has not been achieved in the way we had planned.
And also some cultural situations are coming into play as well, because Biden announcing in April that the United States would be out by perhaps August. So the way many Afghans interpreted that, the U.S. lost. It was throwing in the towel. And history shows the way that...
Yeah, I'm just wondering, but that's a great point, actually, because this deal was made in April, right? Then we had this very inspired leak, I would say, from U.S. intelligence sources saying the Taliban could take over Kabul from 30 to 90 days. If you're sitting as a soldier in in Afghanistan, in the Afghan military, what are your thoughts?
Well, exactly. And that's, again, getting back to that whole tribal mentality. They don't want to fight for a loser. So a lot of Afghans at that point simply thought, well, I'm done. I'm not going to risk my life if the U.S. is leaving. But also, it gets even before that, just looking at the way all of this did unfold, that the troops that were there, they'd been victimized by corruption. A lot of their higher-ups had been taking the pay that should have been gone to those troops. They were also not receiving food on a regular basis. Right. So there are all kinds of things that fed into this, and we're really going to start hearing this play out in the coming days, but we all certainly hope that a human tragedy is not unfolding on that airport. The United States still controls the airspace over that airport. Obviously, no commercial aircraft are landing now, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens to those people. And also, there are still some U.S. citizens that are going to have to get their way through that phalanx of people to get to the airport, and there is a real anti-U.S. sentiment on the ground right now.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks for being with us. No doubt we'll be talking to you again in the days to come. To further discuss the crisis in Afghanistan and what comes next, let's bring in our panel here in Washington, D.C. Brian Becker is the Executive Director of the Answer Coalition. Also from Washington, D.C., Omar Samad is a former Afghan ambassador to Canada and France and a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Mohammad Haqmal is the former Afghan public health chief. He joins us from London. And from Amsterdam, Lynne O'Donnell is an author and journalist. Welcome to all of you. Lynne, let me start with you in Amsterdam. You actually were in Afghanistan just this weekend. You took the last commercial flight out over the weekend, and you're now in the Netherlands. Tell us about the situation in Kabul, the capital, when you left.
Well, hi. Yeah, I did leave after 3 months of a reporting trip. I left on Sunday. I noticed on Sunday morning early as I was driving to the airport that there was no security on the streets. Afghanistan, well, the Afghan capital, Kabul, has been famous for its ring of steel over the recent years, and that had just disappeared altogether. This followed a couple of days of speculation about what was going on at the presidential palace. Friday, Saturday, was the former president, Ashraf Ghani, going to resign or not? He was scheduled to make a live telecast on Friday that was cancelled on Saturday. He went ahead with a pre-recorded announcement, but it was really just about reconvening and reconfigurating his security strategy. Too little, too late. I think that really what happened was an implosion of the government under a president who had no strategy, was incapable of leadership. He kept changing his senior personnel, the defence minister, the interior minister, generals on the ground. He wasn't able to present the united front that the Americans expected. He was the failure. I think that the buck stops with Ashraf Ghani. The international combat missions ended in 2014. Ashraf Ghani had 6 years, as did his military leaders and the rest of his cabinet, to come up with a strategy and some form of leadership to keep their country safe and their people safe, and he failed. 2 decades, $2 trillion, tens of thousands of lives. The buck stops, I think, with Ashraf Ghani. Anybody who knew anything about Joe Biden and his views on large military footprints should not have been surprised by the decision that he made.
Lynne, you've covered Afghanistan for several months, as you pointed out, and you've written much about it. I've read your pieces. Now that the Taliban are in control, do you expect them to launch some kind of campaign of retribution against those who assisted the United States and other NATO allies? And what about the gains that women made over the last 20 years in Afghanistan? Do you expect that to be rolled back very quickly?
I think it's already been rolled back, and as I tried to tell you, I haven't covered Afghanistan just for a few months. I've covered it for 20 years. What the Taliban have been doing over recent months is going into districts and re-establishing something along the lines, but in my view, quite a bit worse, than that which existed between 1996 and 2001, when they did control most of the country. They've ordered women back into their homes to stop working. They've closed girls' schools. They have announced that they will be rounding up young girls and women to be married off to their fighters. There's been door-to-door searches for people that they perceive as being their enemies, summary executions, disappearances, bodies turning up in open ground, battlefield mutilations.
So what then, Lynne, do you make of the fact that the United States signed this deal with the Taliban, excluding the Taliban government, at least the Afghan government?
Yeah. Well, President Trump was widely known as a man who did not read, had no depth of knowledge of, certainly of foreign affairs. What he wanted was to pull troops out of Afghanistan after 20 years because he thought it would be an election winner. He did a deal directly with the Taliban in Doha. He gave them political legitimacy, and yes, you're right, he marginalised the Afghan government, which was purportedly democratically elected, and thereby the Afghan people. Now, Joe Biden came in and he said this deal was done by America and we feel we have to deal with it. You can go back and find that that's what he said. We have to stick to a deal that was done for and by America. Right. But as I said, anyone who knew anything about Joe Biden's view of large military footprints should not have been surprised that he also wanted to take the bulk of the US troops out. It's not a drawdown to zero. Yeah. There are still thousands of troops left there, special forces, guarding the embassy and the airport. And they're doing that in cooperation with the Turkish troops as well, as you know. So, you know, nothing is surprising in this. Anyone who says they were surprised has not been paying attention.
Okay, let's go to London to Mohammad Haqmal. Mohammad, you were the public health chief in Afghanistan. What do you make of this very swift takeover by the Taliban? They seem to have encountered very little opposition.
Well, I think now it's difficult, to comment because, these things very quickly happen. And really what we are seeing now, just in terms of communications, when Taliban is communicating, with these, let's say with the line ministry, like employee of the Minister of Public Health, Minister of Higher Education. And today I was following with my colleagues back in country. So in communication, they are looking at bit difference, but in reality, what was mentioned earlier, by our colleagues, from she's in touch also with the ground. So we don't think the Taliban has changed a lot. So this is the same Taliban. Maybe in some area they have been, a bit changed, not in a positive way, maybe a negative way, because like disappearing of people, in some area. This is one of the biggest challenges. Still, some people are complaining about it. But what some people are like, most of the Afghan are optimistic, so they are saying that probably, this will be the best opportunity for us, to end this 4 decades, conflict. So we are hoping that one, but we will see in next few weeks, if Taliban is really trying, to accept a kind of broader government, it's not like, to control everything by their hands, like what they did, between 1995 and 2001. Right. So situation is not very clear, to people in the ground, So let's see, we need to see the situation at least for next 2 or 3 weeks, to see how they will also go ahead, with and they will share also their government plan.
Ambassador Omar Samad, the Taliban takeover, as I said, of Afghanistan took place very quickly and with very little opposition. Then we had President Ashraf Ghani, who fled the country. By Saturday, he was gone. In fact, the defense minister was very critical of the president. He said that the president had sold out the country. So what is your assessment of what happened over this weekend?
What happened was that the political track was sabotaged by the former president of Afghanistan. I agree that the buck, at least half of the buck stopped with him. The other half, I think we can also share that with the international community strategy over the years. But the political track was sabotaged for the past 18 months at least. There were many chances, opportunities to negotiate in earnest and with substantive, meaningful approaches. But it's pretty clear now that Mr. Biden said it. He said, I told Mr. Ghani these are the choices you have. And Mr. Ghani was defiant in saying that he controls a very strong army and that he's going to fight. So he really didn't have the political will to deal. Why didn't he? Because if he did, the only condition that he had to satisfy in order to bring peace to Afghanistan was that he had to step down. And he did not want to step down under any circumstances. So he he came up with all kinds of excuses. And finally, we reached a point where he realized that the Taliban have gone back to a military track. They've conquered all of Afghanistan, and he had to flee, which is very unfortunate. He left the Afghan people, the Afghan state the way it was. Apparently, they took bags of money with them.
Yeah.
And so we are at a point where we now have to look at what to do next. We can discuss the past. We'll have a lot of time to discuss. We now need to look at what's the opportunity before us.
So, Ambassador, when you say the political track was sabotaged, are you saying then that there was a possibility at some point of a negotiated settlement in Afghanistan, that there could have been some kind of power-sharing government in place, but it was President Ghani who didn't want that?
Absolutely. I know for a fact. I followed this with insights into what has been said, done. Last week, when Mr. Abdullah was in Doha, the last time he went there, he was told by the Taliban that we are ready and willing to sit down with the rest of you, with everyone, with except of Mr. Ghani, because he represents the American occupation in Afghanistan, and our faith doesn't allow us to do this. So it's a very complex issue. So you need to go and tell him to step down so we can go on with a political settlement, and all of us agree to a new future for Afghanistan. And he came back and told this to Ghani. And Ghani, again, as our first commentator said, basically, did not agree, and he came up with all kinds of excuses. 24 hours later, when Kabul was surrounded, he fled. So, yes, there is a track record, and we can go, and history will show, I'm sure a lot of this will be revealed. Biden made, President Biden today actually alluded to it.
Brian Becker, let's look at the response from the White House over the events of this past weekend. The United States Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has described the U.S. involvement as, quote, a success when he was asked about this over the weekend on television. He also rejected any comparison to this U.S. withdrawal with that of the withdrawal from Vietnam 46 years ago. And President Biden told us just a few days ago that he did not expect any blanket takeover of the whole country by the Taliban. Did the United States get this wrong, or did they know what would happen? Was it just a matter of getting out in whatever way they wanted to?
Well, clearly, Joe Biden's presentation, along with Antony Blinken, where they gave, full assurances that this would not be like Saigon. It wouldn't be this chaotic, humiliating exit from a country. Blinken even said nothing between a Friday and a Monday could happen. And indeed, it was on a Sunday. So in all ways, they boxed themselves into a corner. But I think that's kind of a secondary issue. The reality is that the U.S. has been defeated in Afghanistan. The government that fell, the Ashraf Ghani government, the fact that no one would fight for it and that it wouldn't fight for itself, an army of 300,000 people, all of this after 20 years is an indication that this government was nothing other than the shadow projection of American power, meaning it lacked its own legitimacy and credibility. And its failure to try to find a political settlement also is indicative of that. And the fact that the moment the U.S. said we're going to stop the air bombing of Afghanistan, there were 7,500 bombs dropped in 2019, an equal number in 2018. Without American air power, the government would absolutely collapse. That showed that the government would collapse. That means the defeat of the U.S. effort in Afghanistan is a given. I think Biden's speech today, while it was ridiculed by the media and by the punditocracy, it will work well with the American people who don't believe that the United States should be in endless war, either in Iraq or in Afghanistan or elsewhere. So I think there's a disconnect between the way the media presentation of this and the way the American people feel, including the veteran community, many of whom served multiple deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. I think people realize this is a defeat. It's always messy when you're taking responsibility for a defeat. Victory has 1,000 fathers. Defeat is always an orphan. Biden did something and took responsibility for it. He's being chastised, but I don't think ultimately it will hurt him with the American people.
Brian, this is a war that's been waged by 4 United States presidents. It seemed that none of them had a clue on how this would end. Just listen to this.
Thanks to our military and our allies and the brave fighters of Afghanistan, the Taliban regime is coming to an end.
And by the end of this year, the transition will be complete, and Afghans will take full responsibility for their security, and our combat mission will be over. America's war in Afghanistan will come to a responsible end.
The likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
So, Brian, it may be the hopes of those presidents that that's the way it would end, but there's another view as well. In fact, I was reading a piece by Glenn Greenwald, the U.S. journalist, on his website, in which he says what this was a concerted and deliberate campaign of misinformation, deceit, and lies. Was it?
Yes, it is. I mean, it's deception of the American people and maybe a degree of self-deception as well. The generals were saying the same things. Things are always going great. I mean, the reports for the first 10 years is the light is at the end of the tunnel. Similarly, the U.S. said the same things to itself, the military and the political leaders, until the Tet Offensive in end of January 1968, when suddenly it became clear that there was no light at the end of the tunnel. So the American politicians and generals who send young people to shoot and be shot at by people they don't know, to kill lots of other people, to have life-changing experiences or to lose their life, at the end of these gross incompetence, ineptness, miscalculations, the people who do this over and over again, the foreign policy establishment, they pay no consequence. They go off and make speeches, or President Obama has a great birthday bash. They make speeches and write books. Meanwhile, soldiers and veterans and their families are alienated, they're hurt, there's an epidemic of suicides. And back in Afghanistan or in Vietnam or in Iraq, it's just an ocean of misery as a consequence of this kind of gross miscalculation and using U.S. military power with arrogance and hubris. Again, almost always ending up in failure, and again, no accountability.
Lynne, the United States has got very quickly into the blame game. This was President Biden talking. Let's listen.
We spent over $1 trillion. We trained and equipped an Afghan military force with some 300,000 strong, incredibly well equipped. We gave them every chance to determine their own future. We could not provide them was the will to fight for that future.
So, listening to that, it seems the U.S. view here, or at least the U.S. president's view, is that the U.S. did all it could. In the end, it was the Afghans' fault.
Yeah, I said that before.
Yeah.
The buck stops with Ashraf Ghani. He was given 6 years to get used to the fact that the Americans wanted to leave after the combat missions ended. I said that in 2014. Now, $83 billion has been spent by the US alone on developing the defence and security forces for the Afghan government. That's an awful lot of money. We're talking army, police, special forces, and air force. Everything was given to the air force, including training, contractors, you name it. Now, police in Afghanistan have not been paid for 3 months. The police in Afghanistan are militarized and they fight on the front lines and they die. I visited those front lines. I talked to those police. Police that I spoke to hadn't been, not only hadn't been paid, they were being underpaid when they were paid. They were eating days-old bread, hadn't had meat for a month, only rice for dinner. They hadn't had any new weapons. They ran out of ammunition. Now, all of this stuff is being pilfered along the logistical chain. Well, it was until Sunday. I assume that that will still continue because on one side you have a corrupt cabal that was run by the now former President Ashraf Ghani. On the other side you have the Taliban, who are the world's biggest drug dealers, and they make billions of dollars a year peddling heroin and methamphetamine across the world, and that's how they've been funding their side of the war. So it's been really between the devil and the deep blue sea, hasn't it?
Yeah. Ambassador Omar Samad, there is a transition council that's been formed. It comprises the former president, Hamid Karzai, Abdullah, the former chief executive, and the former prime minister, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. What is their role? What are they going to be doing?
Before I answer that, I just want to say to Lynne that it's very unfair to put all the blame on Afghans. I think that, yes, Afghans, and I am one of their critics, someone who was in government until 6 years ago, and I've seen what has happened inside the government, how we mismanaged and how we became corrupt and all of that. But everything was overseen by the international community. It's the international community that provided the money and the guidance.
It's wrong.
Let me finish, please. It's the international community and the strategists, those who were providing the money, that set policy, and they were guiding Mr. Ghani as well. And so there's a lot of blame game going on. We can have that discussion some other day. As far as what your question is concerned, yes, this council is just a bridging means of trying to fill a gap that emerged yesterday. They obviously want to engage the Taliban, and they want to see if the Taliban will engage the rest of the political structure in Afghanistan, in Kabul especially. It's very important because it's the biggest test. Do the Taliban want to eat the whole cake, or do they want to also give pieces of it to the rest of Afghanistan and the other communities that make up Afghanistan? So we will see in the next day or two. There are rumors that maybe a delegation will go to Doha to engage now in earnest, engage the Taliban, or that there will be a Taliban delegation coming from Doha to Kabul and then turn this into an intra-Afghan inside the country. But I think it's very important that we test the Taliban to see if they're open to engaging with other Afghans.
Okay, Ambassador, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. I'm afraid time's caught up with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.